Hello and welcome to Gutter Glitter. I'm your host Kirsty, and you're listening to the podcast where each week I read you a chapter from my memoir by the same name. This is the second last chapter. We have made it, guys. I can't believe it. It has been a journey, but we are almost at the finish line. And I have to say, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for this chapter to be closed, so to speak. You know, it took me about 7 years to pen this all down and several years to put the book together and promote it, and now another year or so recording this audiobook. So, you know, it's been in my world for a very long time, and I'm ready. I'm ready to move on to the next chapter of my life and see what is waiting for me. I've been doing a lot of yoga teaching, but also intensifying and deepening my own yoga practice, which has been really, really beautiful. I've been doing a breathwork course. I've just finished a pranayama teacher training. So I have another offering for my students, and it has been a really transformative practice for my own life as well. So yeah, lots of beautiful things happening. I haven't been in the music world for a very long time, and I'm sort of feeling this kind of itch in the back of my mind to get back into some singing lessons and, you know, even explore my classical voice again. So yeah, I sort of feel like I'm coming back to myself, which is a really lovely feeling. So this chapter is called I Must Go On Standing, chapter 26, and this is a lyric taken from the Regina Spektor song Après Moi, which is from the 2006, holy crap, where does the time go? That's almost 20 years ago. The 2006 album Begin to Hope. This was an extremely transformative album for me. You know, this was the album with Samson on it. Samson, come back to bed, not much hair left on his head. Ate a slice of Wonder Bread, went right back to bed. You know the one. This is the album that also had Fidelity and Better on it. So yeah, you probably know some of these amazing hits from back in the day. I cannot tell you how badly I wanted to be Regina Spektor, but sadly, there is only one. If you don't know much of her stuff, please go look her up. She's incredible. You might know her as the woman who wrote the theme song for Orange is the New Black, You've Got Time, another absolute banger. Look, there's too many amazing songs to list. She's just an absolute gem. So let's have a little listen to Après Moi and we'll get into the chapter.
I must go on standing. You can't break that which isn't yours. I must go on standing. I'm not my own. It's not my choice. Be afraid of the lame. They'll inherit your legs. Be afraid of the old. They'll inherit your soul. Be afraid of the cold. They'll inherit your blood. Après moi la deluge. After me comes the flood. I must go on standing. You can't.
Chapter 26, I Must Go On Standing. Soundtrack, Regina Spektor, Après Moi. When I was around 12 years old, I asked Dad what he was most afraid of. I expected a generic answer like heights, snakes, or spiders. But instead of creepy crawlies or things that go bump in the night, he said, I just want my family to be safe. I remember processing that for a long time afterwards. I was scared of the dark. Petrified, actually. To this day, I am still not a fan, but he was right. There are much scarier things lurking among us, and they often come in the form of other people. an act born of hate, as ugly as rape. That's the act of a monster. But something as deep as love carries the danger of hurt too. The risk that it may become damaged, broken, or even die. So what can we do? I had no idea. So I ran away. Everywhere I went in Melbourne, I was re-traumatized. So I decided if I'm depressed anyway, I may as well be depressed in my favorite place in the world. I packed a bag and flew to Italy to get as far away from the crime scene Melbourne had become as humanly possible. I wasn't at all fearful about traveling alone in a foreign land. In the past, it would have seemed impossible to travel without a man by my side protecting me. Lol. But the last few years had been a storm of confronting my greatest fears, and somehow I was still standing. Somehow I was still here. With that realization came a bravery, or perhaps a boldness I hadn't had before. In fact, what scared me to death was staying in Melbourne. This not only felt like the best option, but the only option. To run. I spent 8 months living and working as an au pair to a 10-year-old girl named Ama, in a tiny provincial town called Savignano. It was located in Italy's Emilia-Romagna region, one of the greatest food provinces in the world. I lived next door to Grace, Federico, and his parents, who became my family. I would love to tell you that being surrounded by flourishing peach orchards, travelling into the red city of Bologna for Italian lessons, and being responsible for a child's well-being kept me out of trouble. But that wouldn't be entirely true. Because wherever I went, there I was. My Italian sojourn provided me with enough of a pause to catch my breath and begin processing my heartache, while surrounded by beauty, friendship, and the best food and wine you've ever tasted. I wasn't using Oxy, but I wasn't sober from alcohol. And drugs of any variety, alcohol included, are frowned upon in 12-step circles. Booze had never been my drug of choice, so I wasn't too worried about a little Lambrusco here or Prosecco there. It's easy to fool yourself into thinking your level of self-medication is nothing more than an appreciation of the culture when you're in a foreign land. As picturesque as life was, it wasn't perfect. The family I lived with fought a lot. 2 weeks into my 6-month stint, I noticed tension between the parents, Andrea and Teresa. After dinner on a warm summer's evening, I was drying dishes by the sink as Andrea handed me the wet ones he had just washed. I was gazing out of the window, enchanted by the lengthy twilight, a sight lacking in the southern hemisphere. We chatted in broken English and Italian respectively, often stopping to look up words on Google Translate before laughing at our own incompetence. It was nice. For the first time, I was connecting with a member of the household in a natural, friendly way, and not in the stunted formalities we danced around as we all got to know each other. All of a sudden, we heard a door slam on the next level above and angry footsteps stomping down the stairs. Teresa barged into the kitchen, now spotless, and whispered something to Andrea. She then turned on her heels and stormed back upstairs without looking at me. Andrea put down the washcloth he had been using to wipe the benches, drooped his head to his toes, and hunched his shoulders. His entire demeanour had changed. He too avoided my eyes as he followed his wife upstairs. Living under the same roof, he wouldn't speak to me or look me in the eye for another month, and even then, only when Teresa was out. This felt all too familiar. Oftentimes, the arguments between Amma and her mother reached uncontrollable heights. Teresa's screaming and Amma's crying could be heard from down the street. I never witnessed any violence, but Teresa's rage regularly veered into verbal abuse. Or, so I assumed, being unable to understand what they were saying. I pulled Andrea, the peacemaker, aside a couple of times to let him know of my concerns. But he brushed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just how they are together. Tomorrow will be better." He had grown used to a life spent walking on eggshells. It was fine for him. He was a carabinieri, an Italian policeman, and an ex-army man. But for Amma, it was causing irreparable damage. I watched the poor girl live in a constant state of anxiety that was reminiscent of my own childhood. Only, in my case, my family had been my safety. I feared what would happen to a child that had no safe place to land. One day, Amma excitedly rushed home from school and proudly presented her artwork to her mother, who worked as an art teacher at another school. Amma looked up at her mum in anticipation of an enthusiastic response. From my room upstairs, I heard wailing and sobbing from below. Then a door slammed, and small footsteps ran away. I chased after Amma, realizing those screams were more authentic than her usual dramatics. She'd learned that while tears pushed her mother away, they elicited much-needed affection from her father. "Amma, aspetta, wait!" I caught up to her and pulled her into my arms, feeling her tiny body heaving with sobs. I thought of all the times my mum had held me through my tears. I was furious on behalf of this poor child that her mother was the one causing such heartache. We found a park bench and took a seat. "What happened?" "She said my picture era brutta, was ugly," she said between sniffs and sobs. "Oh, amore, I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have said that. Do you want to show me?" "Sono sicura che sia bella, come me." Translation: I'm sure it's beautiful like me. I attempted in slow, stumbling Italian, trying to make myself look silly. "Come te?" Translation: like you. "Do you mean like me? Or you think you are so beautiful?" Amma smirked at my ineptitude before correcting me. "I do, actually, yes," I joked back. She gave me a look only a 10-year-old going on 15 could master. "Dai, show me." "No, è brutta. I hate it." And just like that, a child who had spent the day experimenting creatively and had found pride in her artistic endeavors, learned that she was not good enough. Fuck. I wanted to scoop her up, run away, and get her out of that house. But there was no doubt I would have found new and terrifying ways to fuck her up all on my lonesome. We hung out away from the house for a while, and when I was happy with the amount of laughter I'd squeezed out of her, we ventured back. Later, I would go to put something in the rubbish bin and find her art crumpled at the top. I took the paper, smoothed it out, and hung it proudly on my bedroom wall. Her mother never apologized. I tried my best to be Amma's safe place, but it was a tricky line to tread. I was there for Amma, but ultimately I was employed by Teresa. If I didn't stay on her good side, there was a very real chance that she could kick me out, or at the very least, make my living situation unbearable. I had seen what it was like to be on her bad side, and I wasn't feeling strong enough to withstand that wrath. To avoid conflict, I found myself retreating to Grace's place more often, staying longer in the city after language school, and generally avoiding going home. I'd often go to the cafe near the station on my way home and stop for un café. I'd talk in broken Italian to the man behind the bar about his pet gecko. A very difficult conversation to have between two people who do not speak the same language. There were many amusing hand gestures. I also confirmed what I had always suspected. I am not cut out for children. The monotony of it began to wear me down and take a toll on my physical health. I don't have to tell parents this, but it just never stops. I lived with my host family, so even if I was technically clocked off for the day, it's not like I could just switch off. When I was depressed, I still had to be polite. When I was exhausted, I still had to be fun and entertaining. Having fibromyalgia means I require a lot of rest and peace. I basically need to be wrapped up like a burrito, placed in a quiet room, and given gentle pats on the head several times a day. I am the child. When I am in an overstimulating environment or under a lot of stress, my body retaliates by shutting down like a scared sea turtle. I get extraordinarily fatigued, to the point where walking up a short flight of stairs requires a rest halfway through, and my body creates pain that resembles a full body migraine. It's awful. The condition requires a lot of work just to maintain a remission phase. But when it flares up, I'm essentially out of action until I can hibernate for several months and return to the world gently and slowly. Chronic illness sufferers, aka spoonies, I see you. You are important. Now take some vitamin D and go back to bed. By the time my work as an au pair was drawing to a close, I was ready to leave. But in that time, I had grown so much. I had never travelled alone, and now I knew how to navigate railway systems in a non-English speaking country. I could speak Italian at a level of a pretty thick 3-year-old, and although still depressed, I was no longer suicidal, which I never would have believed was possible. Can I get a whoop whoop? I could see progress, and progress meant hope. Hope that there will come a time when I can laugh with friends over dinner and not have a bowling ball of dread in my gut reminding me of everything I've lost. One day, I would throw my head back in pure, unadulterated joy and just laugh. No strings attached. I came home for a few months after Italy to test the waters and soon realized I wasn't ready to be back. This time, I fled to the country of my birth, England. More specifically, the county of my birth, Surrey. I stayed with Grace's sister and brother-in-law, Emily and Andrew, between pet-sitting jobs, which took me to far-flung regions of Greater London. It was wonderful. I felt truly free. Despite travelling and living alone, for the most part, I never felt lonely, because wherever I stayed, I had an array of furry friends. I took care of cats, dogs, and even some tropical fish, which I thought would be simple, but in fact I almost destroyed, despite the meticulous instructions from the homeowner. That was the level of responsibility I needed. Care for small animals and care for self. That was more than enough. At one point, I found myself living in a charming market town 2 hours north of London called Market Harbour. I was there for 6 weeks, caring for 2 dogs, one an oodle of some variety, and the other an old fat Shiba Inu. They were immediately affectionate and would sleep in bed with me every night. Together, we would explore the countryside for hours each day. I was there in the spring, meaning I was around for the births of various animals. I saw paddocks of tiny grazing lambs that looked like waddling clouds, playful calves with wide eyes and enviable eyelashes, and clumsy ducklings desperate to keep up with the rest of the paddling. Yep, that's what they call a group of ducks. Isn't it just divine? There were acres of wild gypsy horses that were so used to humans that they would come and greet me expecting snacks, which I quickly learned to supply. The small horses frolicked and played with the dogs as I threw a ball for them. There were a couple of chubby ones waddling around who I figured must have access to the premium grassy knolls. But one day on my walk, there were 2 brand new foals attempting to stand on wobbly Bambi legs and feed on their mother's milk. I was so moved. I turned off the Bloodhound Gang playing Bad Touch in my ears and just stood watching the beauty of nature in the crisp air. I don't know if I had ever done that before that moment. Life had always been about rushing around, fearful I was missing out. Suddenly, I was met with this moment of stillness, watching the pure, natural connection between mother and baby, and I never wanted the moment to end. After years of wondering if I had been unwittingly flung into purgatory, I was viewing a scene that made me wonder if, even for a moment, I was in heaven. Between bouts of tranquility, my grief and rage would occasionally bubble over, and I would need to let it out like a pot boiling over. My distress could simmer beneath the surface for weeks, suppressed by cute animals, new scenery, and loving friends. But whenever I stayed in one place too long, the grief would churn and twist inside me. It often occurred when I was living far from Emily and Andrew and had been left to my own devices for some time. I would get lonely, angry, sad, or all 3, and find myself drowning my sorrows at the local pub with whoever would put up with the obnoxious Aussie brat I became when drunk. I learned quickly that my recovery story was not going to be smooth sailing. Not having easy access to Oxy in London, I leaned heavily on alcohol and took the opportunity to participate in any little white baggie I happened to find myself in front of. It's easy to get away with being an alcoholic in England. 1, because seemingly everyone is, and 2, there is a pub every 2 meters. So if you get kicked out of one, it's as simple as on to the next. By now, I was an expert at spotting the town drug dealer. Without fail, he would be loitering in the corner, chain-smoking cigarettes, while regularly answering calls on one of the phones in his pockets, thinking he was stealth with subtle handshakes and money exchanges. I felt like Sherlock Bloody Holmes, only I wasn't solving crimes for the sake of the greater good. I wanted to join in said criminal activities. Some would call these nights of debauchery relapses. I prefer to think of them as learning curves. It was easier to act out in the UK. I didn't have the eyes of my family watching my every move, and there seemed to be more broken souls wandering around than in Italy. Or perhaps I was just attracting them. This served me well on my nights of volatile healing. See, there's tranquil healing, which is all kumbaya, meditation, healthy lifestyle, and a fuck ton of therapy, all essential for a better life. And then there is what I have labelled volatile healing, used for blowing off steam and thus avoiding becoming a mass murderer. This includes copious amounts of alcohol, coke binges, and fuckboys. Some may argue this is less helpful. I'm on the fence. One long night, while trying to forget, I found myself at the pub for last drinks with 3 lost boys. There was no fear around being the only girl in the group, simply because I no longer lived with fear. All my greatest fears had been realized, and I had nothing left to lose. But what I could gain was a night free from fighting the war inside me, and for that, I would do anything. Raki was the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. Aptly named, he was aggressive, violent, and a hardcore party boy, out from Friday to Sunday every weekend. Even more worrying was how charming and attractive he was in a Peaky Blinders type of way. He was blonde, blue-eyed, and had a nice physique, but he was weathered. For someone in his 30s, he looked a lot older from a lifetime of smoking and drinking. He was a self-proclaimed geezer and the only person left in Greater London who still regularly used Cockney slang. The local police had their eye on him. I once saw him explain away why he was carrying 3 mobile phones on his person at the local pub. He spun bullshit like it was going out of style. But instead of it feeling sneaky and manipulative, a la Alessandro, it was exciting. Although a truly harmful person, he came across as more mischievous than anything else. We had a couple of dates that never went anywhere, predominantly because he kept skipping out on them halfway through. On our first date, he got a call from a mate who I could hear yelling through the phone. He was gathering his things and flying out the door as he called out, "My mate's in a domestic with his girl. She's gone mental, throwing shit and threatening to stab him. I got to get over there. Later, babe." It would make modern-day Kirsty's skin crawl to be referred to as babe by a relative stranger, but when he said it, I found his assumed familiarity amusing. Likewise, the sense of responsibility he held for his boys, beyond all sense of fear of consequence, was intriguing. It made you feel that if you belonged to him in some way, you were safe. Life was a game to him, and he preferred it when he was right on the cusp of getting caught. I tried to imagine Simon actively running toward a knife fight in defense of his friend's honor. The thought was so far-fetched that all my mind could produce was an image of him clomping onto the scene wearing empty tissue boxes on his feet, toilet rolls on his wrists as armor, and slowly sweeping his cap backwards to dueling music from an old western. Joining us at the pub that night was an older guy, about 60, attractive but aged, with long hair and sad eyes. He was kind, but a little handsy as the night wore on. The third and final guest was tall and good-looking, but too socially awkward to be attractive. He was funny without meaning to be, with his blunt and often brutal honesty throughout the night. The 4 of us, not wanting the night to end, found ourselves hobbling back to Raki's house at 2 a.m. At his basic but surprisingly nice apartment, we drank cold beer until it ran out, then warm beer that had been resting on the floor next to the fridge. It was disgusting, but it didn't matter. Anything goes down a treat with a line or 10 of Coke. Raki was both the town's debt collector and Coke dealer. He was fascinating to watch. As we would finish one little pile of Coke between us, thinking that was it for the night, he would start rummaging around behind TV cables, under candles on the mantel, even behind photographs of his young son, to produce yet another package of happiness wrapped in foil. Between us, we'd alternate who was seated on his 3rd-story window ledge as we chain-smoked the night away. As the sun started to rise, he pinned sheets over the window to prevent the shame from creeping in. Truth be told, this was a fun night. But then we did it again. And again. And very quickly, the appeal began to fade, shame and regret coming in earlier each time. It became harder to maintain the illusion that we were just mad kids having a wild night. Clarity slowly crept in. They were all deeply damaged and torturously sad individuals, using each other for some quick relief. Eventually, it becomes like trying to clean your dishes with grease. The harder you try, the more hopeless it becomes. Everyone in that room had a heartbreaking story that had brought them there. Socially awkward Ash had recently been left by his wife, who had been having an on-off affair with a gorgeous Brazilian. She had up and moved to Brazil to be with her new man, taking Ash's baby boy with her. His heart was broken in so many directions that he didn't know where to place his grief. I could relate. The older man had sad eyes for a reason. He'd had a wife once and loved her deeply, but she had died of a heroin overdose 2 decades prior. He had been the one to find her body and blamed himself for her death. He'd never been able to love again. They had a daughter, and his eyes lit up when he spoke about her. He said she was my age and kept insisting I meet her. She too was a musician. I smiled and agreed, knowing he would rethink his invitation by morning. I imagined solemnly what would have had to happen in my own father's life to bring him to a place like this. A man who had one story about getting drunk on tequila when he was in his early 20s, and it terrified him so much he never touched the stuff or got drunk ever again. Racky's story was the most upsetting. He told me how he'd seen his father shoot himself in the head when he was just 2 years old. He recounted the story like it was nothing, then shrugged and said, "I don't give a shit. He was a prick." I leaned in a little and examined his face for any micro movements that might indicate he was disguising his incredible trauma. But there was nothing in his cool blue eyes. He was obsessed with power and notoriety. That was his drug of choice over anything else. 0 points to the shrink who can work out why the little boy who couldn't save his daddy might want to rule the fucking world. If I were him, I could imagine doing everything in my power to avoid ever feeling that scared and helpless ever again. Even if it meant closing my heart so tightly that I would become a raging narcissist incapable of love. As someone who has been in therapy since I was a teenager and is medicated for my mental illnesses, I was shocked to learn how taboo this still is in England. The guys laughed at me for being so forthright about the fact that I took antidepressants. Horrified, Racky claimed he'd never put that shit in his body. As he held a credit card in one hand, primed to rack a fresh line, and a cigarette in the other. He was about 18 beers down when he mocked me for going to rehab. "That's a pussy's way out," he called it. I laughed at the absurdity. I knew I wasn't perfect. I knew, as an addict, I was in the worst scenario I could possibly put myself in. But I also knew that I was growing, and I hadn't given up. I could see how much work I still had to do. But for the first time, I was also seeing how far I had come. I felt proud. I felt hopeful. Racky didn't scare me. Quite the opposite, in fact. I found his anger and volatility comforting. Perhaps because it mirrored my own, or maybe because I had been living in a perpetual guessing game with Simon, always trying to make sense of his eternally calm facade. He was fine, even in the most distressing circumstances. Therefore, I could only assume he was never actually fine. Raki let you know what he was okay with and what wasn't going to fly. I didn't always agree with him, but at least there were parameters to work with. At least there was information exchange, which was reassuring after years of floundering in my internal guessing game. He did some unspeakable things. He hurt people in ways that destroyed their lives. He beat people half to death over something as trivial as money. Ultimately, that lack of empathy is what pushed me away. But he made choices with conviction, and that was attractive to me. Simon would never actively hurt anyone, but his lack of action created waves of unimaginable pain. The only difference is that you can't see inaction, so you end up feeling more and more alone. Give me conflict. Give me arguments. Give me anger if it means we can grow. I'm not here for passive aggression or burying emotions in the hope of the bad thing going away. Has that ever worked for anyone? I'm not saying Raki is in the right, but there has got to be a middle ground between stagnancy and impulsive combat. Perhaps healthy communication. Just a wild thought. Because of the wild trajectory my own life had taken, I tried not to judge those who might otherwise be labelled as dangerous or bad. I could only assume they believed, as I did, that they were good people who had been wronged by life in some way, burdened by pain to the point of breaking, and thus becoming people they were never meant to be. Who we are and who we need to become to survive are two different things. Cass Morgan. I was not someone who found growth or compassion easily. I was miserable for years, and then I got mad, enraged by the lack of justice and callous randomness of life. I'd been promised that if I worked hard and behaved, I would be rewarded, but it's a lie. Sometimes life just takes and doesn't give back. There are people who never catch a break. Those of us with a fair spattering of good days to our bad ones find it hard to comprehend that. But I've met these people and spent hours, if not days, drinking with them, getting high with them, and hearing their stories. Objectively, these are bad people, but objectively, so was I. I would partake in illegal activity. I would go out looking for a fight. I would use drugs. I would drive drunk and generally just be a real shit to be around. I could be mean, rude, diabolically vengeful, and clinically insane. But I never thought of myself as a bad person. I thought of myself as deserving of my badness. I felt that any kindness would be a gift back to the world that had taken everything from me. And of that, it was undeserving. I had nothing left to give, and what I did have, I was holding on to with both hands. That was mine. My rage, my grief, my despair. Thanks for listening. If you want more, check out the show notes and follow the link to my website or Linktree, where you can get your very own copy of the book in eBook or paperback. Join me on Instagram or listen to the Spotify playlist of all the theme songs from the book. Don't forget to subscribe to the pod so it downloads straight to your app each week. And if you like the show, why not share it with your mates? All right, see you guys. Bye.